The mathematics of victory were being calculated in French dust during the summer of 1944. Not in battle plans alone. Not in casualty reports or territorial gains. The true equations of triumph lived in production statistics and supply chain innovations that would reshape military logistics forever. Those endless American truck convoys moving day and night represented something German military planners had never encountered. A form of industrial warfare they possessed no counter for. This was modern conflict stripped to its essential truth. Wars were won by factories as much as fighters. What rolled through France that autumn proved American industrial capacity had reached heights that seemed impossible. The sight of those convoys marked with red balls became the visible symbol of inevitable defeat for German forces retreating across the countryside. They could count the trucks. They could never stop them. This story began not with transportation, but with crisis. A logistics nightmare that threatened to halt the fastest military advance in modern history. The solution that emerged from desperation became one of the most successful supply operations ever attempted. German forces defending France in 1944 faced an enemy unlike any in military history. American logistics operated on scales that traditional military doctrine declared impossible. The Red Ball Express represented that overwhelming capacity in its most visible form. Those young drivers, pushing through one more run, carried more than supplies. They hauled proof of American industrial dominance. The crisis had roots in success. Operation Cobra, launched July 25, 1944, shattered German defensive lines west of St. Lo. Massive carpet bombing by Allied air forces preceded an American breakthrough that swept into open French countryside. The subsequent advance occurred at speeds that surprised even Allied commanders. By June's end, 1944, Allied forces had unloaded 17,000 vehicles through temporary mulberry harbors and directly across Normandy beaches. These makeshift ports, constructed in England and towed across the Channel, processed supplies at rates exceeding many established European ports. The mulberries handled 7.5 million gallons of fuel, plus 500,000 tons of supplies by late June. The Normandy breakout proved far more difficult than planners anticipated. 7 weeks after D-Day, Allied forces remained confined to a beachhead only 50 miles wide and 20 miles deep. German defenders exploited Norman hedgerow defensive advantages. This created grinding attritional warfare that threatened to replicate World War I's static battles. General George Patton's Third Army became operational August 1st. Immediate rapid advances characterized the pursuit across France. Within weeks, Patton's forces advanced 50 to 75 miles per week, sometimes covering 80 miles in single weeks during peak operations. By mid-August, Third Army elements had reached the Seine River over 150 miles from Normandy beaches. This operational success created unprecedented logistics crisis. Allied bombing campaigns that isolated Normandy from German reinforcements before D-Day had simultaneously destroyed much French rail infrastructure. The French railway system lay in ruins, unable to move supplies necessary for sustaining rapidly advancing armies. Combat divisions required approximately 700 to 750 tons of supplies daily. With 28 Allied divisions advancing across France by late August, total daily requirements exceeded 2,000 tons. Patton's armored divisions alone consumed 400,000 gallons of gasoline daily during offensive operations. The fundamental problem involved distance. Each truck carrying supplies from Normandy to forward units required round trips back to beaches for additional loads. As fronts advanced eastward, round-trip times increased dramatically. Trucks delivering supplies 200 miles from Normandy required over 50 hours for complete cycles. The same vehicles could complete 2 deliveries daily when fronts remained only 50 miles distant. By August 20, 1944, American armies experienced critical shortages of fuel and ammunition, threatening to halt offensive operations entirely. Forward units literally ran out of gas within sight of retreating German forces. The rapid advance characterizing August was about to stop. Not because of enemy resistance, because supply trucks could not maintain pace with advancing armies. In desperate 36-hour planning sessions beginning August 23, Transportation Corps officers developed solutions that would become legendary. They would create dedicated express routes using parallel one-way highways reserved exclusively for military supply traffic, operating continuously 24 hours daily. The system would be called the Red Ball Express. The name derived from late 19th century American railroad practice. Beginning around 1892, Santa Fe Railroad marked priority freight cars containing perishable goods with red balls. These trains received right-of-way over all other traffic. The term red ball became standard American railroad terminology for express shipping. During D-Day preparations, logistics systems in England used the name Red Ball Express to rush supplies to southern ports for invasion. Transportation Corps officers borrowed the name for their new operation. Colonel Loren Albert Ayres received command organizing the operation. Known to subordinates as Little Patton for aggressive leadership style, Ayres faced challenges assembling sufficient trucks and drivers to sustain operations on unprecedented scales. He needed approximately 6,000 vehicles, 12,000 drivers working in two-man teams, mechanics to maintain fleets, traffic control personnel, route systems handling continuous traffic without creating gridlock. The trucks were readily available. General Motors had produced 56 2,000 CCKW trucks between 1941 and 1945, making the 2.5-ton GMC the second most numerous American military vehicle after the Jeep. These trucks, nicknamed Deuce and a Half by soldiers, featured six-wheel drive, GMC 270, six-cylinder engines producing 91 horsepower. Warner T5 5-speed transmissions with overdrive. They could carry 2.5 tons off-road or 5 tons on improved highways. The CCKW standardization represented fundamental advantages over German logistics. Every truck was identical, built to same specifications using identical parts. Any mechanic could service any truck. Any driver could operate any vehicle. Spare parts fit every truck in fleets. This industrial standardization taken for granted in American manufacturing exceeded German capabilities by orders of magnitude. Germany entered World War II with over 150 different truck models in military service, each requiring unique spare parts, trained mechanics, and specific maintenance procedures. This fragmentation created continuous logistics nightmares. German units often had immobilized vehicles awaiting parts that would never arrive. Manufacturers had gone out of business or switched production. German supply columns consisting of 40 horse-drawn wagons and dozen trucks of various makes could move approximately 40 tons of supplies 20 kilometers forward on good roads. This required feeding 160 horses and maintaining trucks with no common spare parts. Germany's fragmented industrial base produced dozens of different models. By comparison, single Red Ball convoys of 50 trucks could move 125 tons of supplies 200 kilometers in identical time periods. Finding drivers proved more challenging than securing trucks. Ayres needed 23,000 men willing to drive continuously for extended periods under demanding conditions. The Army's solution reflected racial realities of 1940s America. Approximately 75% of Red Ball drivers would be African American soldiers. The American military in 1944 remained strictly segregated. Military leadership largely believed African Americans unsuitable for combat roles, relegating most black soldiers to service and support units. Quartermaster and Transportation Corps units were disproportionately staffed by African American enlisted men, performing unglamorous but essential work of moving supplies. These soldiers denied combat roles not because of ability, but because of skin color would prove their capabilities under conditions as demanding as any faced by frontline troops. Most Red Ball drivers were under 24 years old. Many had never driven trucks before military service. They came from every region of America, from urban neighborhoods to rural farms, united by determination to contribute to victory despite facing discrimination at home and within the military itself. Operations began August 25, 1944. 67 truck companies commanding 35 WWII trucks moved 4,482 tons of supplies on the first day. Initial routes ran from Saint-Lô to Chartres, approximately 125 miles. Within 4 days, operations expanded to 132 truck companies, operating 5,958 vehicles. The system created continuous loops of traffic unlike anything attempted in military logistics history. 2 parallel highways were commandeered between Normandy and forward supply depots. Northern routes carried loaded trucks eastward toward fronts. Southern routes brought empty vehicles back to Normandy for reloading. All civilian traffic was prohibited. Military vehicles not part of Red Ball convoys could not use these dedicated routes. Traffic control points operated continuously at every major intersection. Military police from the 793rd Military Police Battalion recorded convoy movements, provided directions, ensured priority access, maintained operational discipline. The 793rd's distinctive unit insignia featured 2 red balls on diagonal yellow lines against green backgrounds commemorating their Red Ball service. Every truck displayed red balls painted on both sides and front radiators. Additional markings indicated trucks' positions in convoys, parent units, and cargo types. These visual identification systems allowed controllers to manage traffic flow and identify problems quickly without stopping convoys for inspections. The operational requirements were extraordinarily demanding. Official regulations called for convoys of 5 or more trucks traveling 60 feet apart at 25 miles per hour, escorted by jeeps in front and rear. Trucks were supposed to stop for 10-minute rest breaks every hour. Night driving used cat-eye blackout lights, providing minimal illumination while reducing visibility to enemy aircraft. In practice, these regulations were frequently ignored. Individual trucks often departed Cherbourg immediately after loading, rather than waiting for full convoys to form. Drivers disabled engine governors, limiting top speeds to 45 miles per hour, routinely exceeding 60 miles per hour on straightaways. Rest breaks were skipped when drivers felt capable of continuing. The mission's urgency overrode safety regulations as drivers pushed themselves and their vehicles to maintain supply flow. Round trips from Cherbourg to Chartres and back covered approximately 250 miles, officially requiring 54 hours. Drivers worked in 2-man teams, alternating between driving and sleeping in truck cabs. In theory, each driver received adequate rest. In reality, road conditions, mechanical breakdowns, and operational pressures meant drivers often went days with minimal sleep. Private James Rookard, a 19-year-old driver from Maple Heights, Ohio, later described experiences in interviews preserved by the Veterans History Project. There were dead bodies and dead horses on highways after bombs dropped. I was scared, but I did my job hoping for the best. Being young and about 4,000 miles away from home, anybody would be scared. The physical demands were relentless. Roads damaged by combat and weather created brutal driving conditions. Hitting potholes at high speeds threw drivers against cab ceilings. Tire failures occurred constantly, requiring roadside changes under pressure to catch up with convoys. Mud became the most persistent operational challenge, turning unpaved sections into quagmires that bogged vehicles and slowed entire convoys. Washington Rector of the 39th 16th Quartermaster Truck Company later recalled discrimination that persisted even during this critical operation. "You accepted discrimination. We were warned not to fraternize with whites for fear problems would arise." One veteran remembered an incident where African American units attempted to pass white convoys. White drivers whiplashed their trucks into roadway centers to prevent black drivers from passing, creating dangerous games of chicken on roads where speed was essential. Yet despite discrimination, exhaustion, and danger, Red Ball drivers maintained operations keeping Allied armies advancing. On August 29, 1944, the system reached peak capacity. Fiat 938 vehicles delivered 23.42 tons of supplies in single days. This represented more tonnage than Germany's entire logistics system in France could move through all methods combined: truck, rail, and horse-drawn transport on their best days. The scale of this achievement becomes clear through comparison. At any given moment during operations, approximately 900 trucks were on roads. 2,000 trucks moved loaded toward fronts. 2,000 returned empty to Normandy. The remainder underwent loading, unloading, refueling, or maintenance. The system processed over 6,000 vehicle movements daily while maintaining continuous operations. Sustaining the Red Ball Express itself required massive resources. 6,000 trucks consumed approximately 2 million gallons of gasoline monthly just to operate. Separate from fuel they transported, tire wear from continuous operations at high speeds on damaged roads exhausted approximately 5,000 tires during 83 days of operations. Maintenance requirements meant approximately 10% of fleets were disabled for repairs at any given time. The logistical infrastructure supporting the logistics operation involved establishing refueling points, maintenance depots, traffic control stations along entire routes. Repair crews had to be positioned to respond quickly to breakdowns. Spare parts had to be distributed to maintenance points. All of this metalogistics functioned smoothly while primary missions of moving supplies to combat units continued without interruption. For German forces attempting to defend against Allied advances, American logistics created insurmountable problems. Traditional German defensive doctrine assumed attacking forces would eventually outrun their supply lines, creating vulnerable pauses during resupply that defenders could exploit through counterattacks. American logistics eliminated these opportunities. German military logistics in 1944 relied heavily on horse-drawn transport. Germany had entered wars with approximately 27,500 horses. Their marked dependence on horses actually increased as wars progressed. Motor vehicle losses exceeded industrial replacement capacity, forcing German divisions to rely more heavily on horse-drawn wagons, even as Allied forces became increasingly motorized. Typical German infantry divisions in France during 1944 included approximately 50 motorized vehicles and 1,500 horse-drawn wagons pulled by 4,000 to 6,000 horses. These animals required 12 pounds of oats and 15 pounds of hay daily, plus constant water access. In offensive operations, horses could move approximately 15 to 20 miles per day before requiring rest. The logistics of feeding horses consumed enormous resources that could otherwise support combat operations. German supply columns consisting of 40 horse-drawn wagons and dozen trucks of various makes could move approximately 40 tons of supplies 20 kilometers forward on good roads. This required feeding 160 horses and maintaining trucks with no common spare parts, because Germany's fragmented industrial base produced dozens of different models. By comparison, single Red Ball convoys of 50 trucks could move 125 tons of supplies 200 kilometers in same time periods. German forces needed to move 40 tons 20 kilometers. This 10-to-1 advantage in logistics capacity gave American forces operational capabilities German commanders simply could not match. German attempts to interdict Red Ball operations achieved minimal success. Luftwaffe attacks once feared as primary threats to convoy operations proved ineffective, as German air power collapsed under sustained Allied fighter superiority. By September 1944, Luftwaffe sorties over France had become so rare that Red Ball convoys operated without fighter escorts and suffered negligible losses to air attacks. Ground interdiction attempts proved equally futile. German units that attempted to ambush supply convoys discovered that American logistics troops fought effectively when attacked. Drivers carried personal weapons and returned fire. Military police escorts engaged attackers with automatic weapons and called in rapid reaction forces that arrived with overwhelming firepower. The few successful ambushes convinced German commanders that attacking supply columns risked casualties disproportionate to any possible gains. Primary threats to Red Ball operations came from operational factors rather than enemy actions. Driver exhaustion caused accidents that killed or injured personnel and destroyed vehicles. One veteran described seeing exhausted drivers fall asleep at wheels and crash into ditches or other vehicles. Mechanical breakdowns temporarily reduced available trucks until maintenance teams completed repairs. Road damage from weather and continuous heavy traffic required ongoing repair efforts to keep routes passable. Despite these challenges, Red Ball Express delivered between 41,000 and 42,000 tons of supplies between August 25 and November 16, 1944. Sources vary on exact totals. This represented over 1 million individual truckloads, moved average distances of 250 miles through weather, mechanical challenges, and operational demands that would have broken less resilient logistics systems. The operational scope expanded beyond original routes as Allied forces advanced. By September, multiple express routes operated across France, each with distinctive markings but following same operational principles established by original Red Ball. The White Ball Express operated from Le Havre and Rouen to Paris starting in early October. The Little Red Ball carried priority supplies from Normandy to Paris. The Green Diamond Express moved supplies from Normandy to railheads 100 miles inland. The Red Lion Express supplied British 21st Army Group in Belgium. The ABC Express route connected Antwerp to depots 90 miles inland after that crucial port opened in November. These interconnected routes created transportation networks operating independently of rail infrastructure, providing flexibility that traditional logistics could not match. When German counterattacks disrupted rail lines, truck convoys rerouted within hours. When ports became congested, supplies shifted to alternate routes seamlessly. The American logistics system demonstrated resilience through redundancy and adaptability. The Red Ball Express officially ended operations November 16, 1944. By that date, French rail lines had been sufficiently repaired to resume moving supplies. More significantly, the port of Antwerp in Belgium had been captured intact on September 4th and fully opened to shipping by late November, after Allied forces cleared German forces from the Scheldt estuary. Antwerp's deep water port facilities could handle far more tonnage than Normandy beaches and Mulberry harbors, dramatically shortening supply lines to forward units. As Red Ball operations wound down, tonnage delivered decreased accordingly. From the peak of 12,342 tons on August 29th, daily deliveries settled to approximately 5,000 tons through October, then declined to around 2,700 tons daily in early November. By mid-November, only 5 truck companies remained on Red Ball routes compared to 132 at peak operations in early September. The cost of this achievement was measured in exhausted personnel and worn-out equipment. Maintenance records indicate that Red Ball trucks required major repairs approximately every 30 days of continuous operations. The extreme operational tempo wore out mechanical components far faster than normal usage. Personnel casualties from accidents, exhaustion, and few enemy encounters totaled several hundred. Though exact figures remain unclear due to incomplete record-keeping under operational pressures. Yet this cost was minimal compared to strategic value delivered. Red Ball Express enabled Allied forces to maintain pressure on retreating German armies at moments when sustained pursuit might have ended wars in 1944. Although fuel shortages eventually forced operational pauses in September, sustained offensives from August through early October inflicted irreplaceable losses on German forces and brought Allied armies to Germany's frontiers. Military historians continue debating whether different logistics priorities might have enabled Allied forces to breach Germany's West Wall defenses in autumn 1944, potentially ending wars before winter. These counterfactual discussions often center on fuel allocation decisions. Some argue that concentrating resources on single thrusts, either Field Marshal Montgomery's northern routes or Patton's southern advances, might have achieved breakthroughs that broad front strategies prevented. These debates, while intellectually fascinating, sometimes overlook fundamental achievements Red Ball represented. The system delivered sufficient supplies to support simultaneous offensives across 400-kilometer fronts, while maintaining operational flexibility that allowed rapid responses to changing tactical situations. No previous army in military history had sustained such operational tempo at such distances from secure supply bases using only road transport. The racial composition of Red Ball units reflected America's segregated military, while simultaneously undermining racist assumptions that created segregation. African American soldiers served their nation despite facing discrimination at home and within military structures. Their performance on Red Ball Express demonstrated capabilities that racial prejudice claimed they lacked. 3/4 of Red Ball drivers were black soldiers who had been assigned to non-combat service units, not because of ability, but because military leadership in 1944 maintained racial restrictions on combat roles. These men proved their courage, competence, and dedication under conditions as demanding as any faced by combat troops. They drove through enemy territory, operated under fire when German units attempted interdiction, maintained operational discipline despite exhaustion that would have broken less determined individuals. General George Patton, despite his own racial prejudices, acknowledged Red Ball's essential contribution to his army's advance. He stated that the 2.5-ton truck is our most valuable weapon. Colonel John Eisenhower, son of Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower, argued that without Red Ball truck drivers, advances across France could not have been made. After wars, African American Red Ball drivers returned to segregated America. Many faced continued discrimination despite their service. Yet their achievement contributed to growing pressure for military integration. The performance of black soldiers in logistics roles and in combat positions, some eventually held during the Battle of the Bulge, helped demonstrate the absurdity of racial segregation. President Harry Truman's 1948 executive order, integrating armed forces, drew partly on evidence that racial segregation harmed military effectiveness. Red Ball drivers recognized this contradiction at the time. They were serving a nation that denied them full citizenship rights. Delivering supplies to armies fighting for freedom abroad, while facing discrimination at home. The WWII campaign promoted by black newspapers during wars, victory against fascism abroad, and racism at home resonated with Red Ball soldiers who embodied this dual struggle. In September 1985, 41 years after operations began, surviving Red Ball drivers held reunions in Alexandria, Virginia. Over 500 former drivers attended, bringing families to share memories of their service. Former Corporal Charles Johnson, who had served with the 783rd Military Police Battalion directing Red Ball traffic, spoke at reunions about the significance of their contributions. The drivers had moved over 400,000 tons of supplies in 83 days, keeping armies advancing when conventional logistics wisdom said supply chains must fail. The operational lessons from Red Ball influenced American military logistics for decades. Similar dedicated supply routes appeared during Korean Wars, though on smaller scales. Vietnam logistics adapted Red Ball principles to Southeast Asian conditions with routes like Route 19 and Ho Chi Minh Trail interdiction operations. Desert Storm planners in 1991 studied Red Ball operations when developing supply systems for Kuwait liberation. Modern American military doctrine emphasizes logistics, flexibility, redundancy, and capacity to sustain high operational tempo through superior supply chain management. These principles trace directly to lessons learned during Red Ball Express and broader logistics achievements that sustained Allied operations in World War II. The concept of theater sustainment command structures, centralized logistics planning, and joint logistics operations all evolved from wartime experiences, including Red Ball. General Dwight Eisenhower included the 2.5-ton truck on his list of 6 most vital weapons that won wars in Europe. Alongside Dakota C-47 transport aircraft, the Jeep, the bazooka, atomic bombs, and bulldozers. This assessment from Supreme Allied Commander, who had access to every weapon system in Allied arsenals, underscores strategic importance of logistics in modern warfare. The statistics of Red Ball operations remain impressive by any standard. 83 days of continuous operations delivering average 5,000 tons daily represents sustained logistics performance that equals or exceeds many modern military supply chains. The system moved approximately 4,000 tons total, equivalent to complete supply requirements for 30 divisions for 2 weeks, using only trucks and roads without rail support. The GMC CKW trucks that formed Red Ball's backbone continued service long after wars. The United States military retained CKWs into the 1960s. Surplus vehicles were sold or given to Allied nations worldwide, where they served into the 1990s in some cases. The basic design influenced post-war American truck development, establishing standards that persist in modern military vehicles like M35 series that replaced CKWs. Red Ball demonstrated that in modern mechanized warfare, logistics capacity determines operational possibilities. Armies can only sustain operations at tempo and scales their supply system support. Combat effectiveness means nothing if ammunition runs out, fuel exhausts, or food supplies fail. Americans understood this principle and built logistics systems capable of sustaining unlimited operational tempo. German forces failed to grasp how thoroughly American logistics would dominate campaigns. Wehrmacht logistics officers, who became prisoners of war and were interrogated about German supply challenges, uniformly expressed shock at American logistics capacity. They had studied American industrial production, knew American capacity exceeded German output, but assumed distances involved in transporting supplies across Atlantic and then inland through France would create exploitable vulnerabilities. Instead, they discovered American logistics had no breaking points they could find. American forces delivered more supplies than combat units could use. Ammunition expenditure exceeded anything German forces had witnessed. Artillery batteries fired preparatory barrages, consuming tonnages that would have exhausted German stocks in hours. Tank units advanced without fuel, pauses German doctrine assumed were inevitable. Infantry attacks featured supporting fires that German forces could not match because they lacked ammunition. This American capacity for sustained operations without logistics pauses fundamentally changed defensive planning for German forces. Every German defensive doctrine assumed attacking forces would eventually pause to resupply, creating counterattack opportunities. American logistics eliminated these opportunities. Red Ball convoys ensured ammunition and fuel reached forward units faster than combat operations could deplete stockpiles. The December 1944 Battle of the Bulge represented Germany's final attempt to exploit what Hitler believed was American logistics vulnerability. The Ardennes counteroffensive aimed to reach Antwerp, splitting Allied armies and capturing ports that sustained American operations. Hitler calculated that deep penetration into Allied rear areas would sever supply lines and create crises forcing negotiations. The plan failed partly because of determined American defensive stands at Bastogne, Saint-Vith, and Elsenborn Ridge, but ultimately because German logistics could not sustain offensives. German panzer divisions began operations with fuel for only 150 kilometers of advance. Hitler's planning assumed captured American fuel dumps would supply advancing German units. This assumption proved catastrophically wrong. Red Ball Express drivers, along with other transportation units, raced through Belgium, evacuating fuel dumps ahead of German advances. Thousands of gallons of gasoline and tons of ammunition were moved beyond German reach in operations conducted under chaotic conditions as American forces struggled to contain breakthroughs. These drivers demonstrated courage and effectiveness equal to combat troops, ensuring German forces found empty dumps rather than supplies needed to sustain their offensives. By December 19th, 5 days into offensives, major German panzer formations reported critical fuel shortages. The 2nd SS Panzer Division halted after crossing the Orthe River, immobilized by empty fuel tanks within sight of objectives. The 1st SS Panzer Division abandoned dozens of vehicles after exhausting fuel supplies. Their advance ended not through American resistance, but through logistics failure. German ammunition shortages developed almost immediately. Artillery units conducting preparatory fires exhausted stocks within days. Resupply failed because German horse-drawn supply columns could not navigate icy Belgian roads at speeds necessary to keep pace with advancing units. The few motorized supply units Germany retained lacked sufficient fuel to operate effectively. In contrast, American logistics responded to Bulge crises with speed that stabilized defensive positions within 48 hours. Despite losing important supply dumps in initial breakthroughs, American forces re-established supply lines faster than German forces could exploit disruption. Artillery units defending key positions fired without restrictions, expending ammunition at rates that would have exhausted German stocks immediately. The Battle of the Bulge proved to be final demonstration of logistics, differential that shaped Western fronts since Normandy. American forces could sustain unlimited material expenditure. German forces operated on starvation logistics, making sustained operations impossible. Once American logistics began flowing to defensive positions, outcomes were never truly in doubt. Red Ball Express represented one element of American military logistics that collectively delivered over 7 million tons of supplies to European theater forces between June 1944 and May 1945. This tonnage sustained 85 American divisions, plus supporting Corps and Army troops. Enabled unlimited ammunition expenditure that broke German defensive lines. maintained fuel supplies for mechanized advances that outran German retreat capabilities, provided logistical security, allowing American commanders to fight without worrying that supply failures would compromise operations. The German Wehrmacht never recovered from losses sustained during pursuit across France. Divisions shattered in Normandy and destroyed during retreats to Germany were never adequately rebuilt. Equipment losses exceeded industrial replacement capacity. Manpower casualties could not be replaced with soldiers of equivalent quality. Most significantly, logistics deficiencies that had hampered German operations throughout wars became insurmountable as Allied air superiority destroyed rail networks and fuel shortages immobilized remaining motor transport. Germany's horse-drawn logistics system, obsolete when wars began, proved completely inadequate for modern mechanized warfare. The approximately 3 million horses Germany employed during World War II represented logistics nightmares, consuming resources, limiting operational tempo, and creating vulnerabilities that American mechanization ruthlessly exploited. Every ton of fodder transported to feed horses was tons unavailable for ammunition or fuel. Every unit delayed while waiting for horses to rest was units unable to respond to fast-moving mechanized attacks. The contrast between American trucks and German horses epitomized fundamental industrial disparities that decided wars. American factories produced standardized vehicles in quantities that seemed impossible. German industry struggled to maintain production of diverse vehicle models using increasingly scarce resources and forced labor that could not match free workers' productivity. When wars ended in May 1945, American forces in Europe operated the most sophisticated logistics system ever developed. This system had sustained the largest amphibious invasion in history, supported the fastest sustained advance in modern military operations, overcome setbacks during Bulge offensives, delivered Allied armies to Elbe rivers on schedule. Red Ball Express had been one component of this system, but its symbolic importance exceeded its operational tonnage. Those trucks rolling through France in autumn 1944, marked with red balls and driven by exhausted soldiers pushing through one more run, represented everything that made Allied victory inevitable. They demonstrated American industrial capacity. They proved logistics could win wars as surely as battles. They showed that determination and organization could overcome any obstacle. The Red Ball Express was the visible symbol of American logistics dominance, rolling through France in endless columns that could be counted but not stopped. Those young drivers, many of them African-American soldiers facing discrimination while serving their nation, proved more valuable to victory than anyone anticipated. They kept armies moving when logistics should have forced pauses. They delivered ammunition, enabling unlimited fire support. They hauled fuel, sustaining mechanized advances. They moved supplies, feeding soldiers and maintaining equipment. In doing so, they won wars as surely as infantry who stormed Omaha Beach, tankers who broke through at Saint-Lô, or airborne soldiers who held Bastogne. Red Ball Express demonstrated that in modern warfare, supply sergeants win battles as much as combat commanders. The logistics sustaining operations determined what was operationally possible. American truck drivers delivering thousands of tons daily through French countryside proved more decisive than elite German formations lacking fuel to reach objectives. This was the lesson that evidence of American logistics demonstrated. This was the reality that shattered assumptions about American industrial weakness. This was the truth that Germany's leaders failed to grasp when they challenged the world's greatest industrial power. American trucks rolling through France carried not just supplies, but proof of fundamental principles. Industrial capacity wins modern wars, and America possessed industrial capacity on scales Germany could never match. Red Ball Express operated for 83 days. In that period, it delivered approximately 41,000 tons, wore out 5,000 tires, exhausted thousands of young drivers who pushed themselves beyond reasonable limits because soldiers at fronts needed what they carried. Those 83 days changed military logistics forever. Helped end World War II in Europe by ensuring Allied armies never slowed for want of supplies. The American military never imagined before wars that it would need to create such systems. But when necessity demanded innovation, American ingenuity, industrial capacity, and dedication of thousands of soldiers created logistics operations that became legendary. The Red Ball Express proved that modern military power depends as much on supply chains as firepower. That victories are won in factories and on supply roads as much as on battlefields. That soldiers who drive trucks deserve recognition equal to those who drive tanks. History remembers dramatic moments: the landings at Normandy, the liberation of Paris, the crossing of the Rhine. But behind every advance stood unglamorous but essential work of logistics. The Red Ball Express, operating for less than 3 months in 1944, demonstrated that American industrial might extended far beyond weapons production, to include organizational capacity to deliver those weapons where and when they were needed. That was America's true secret weapon, not just ability to produce more than any adversary, but capacity to deliver production to points of need faster than enemies could respond. The Red Ball Express symbolized this advantage, rolling through France day and night, delivering victory one truckload at a time. The dust clouds rising behind those endless convoys carried more than supplies. They carried proof that American industrial power had no limits enemies could find. Those red balls painted on truck sides became symbols of inevitable defeat for German forces, who could count American vehicles but never stop them. The mathematics of victory were calculated in French dust, written in production statistics that exceeded all previous military logistics, proven by young drivers who pushed through fatigue and danger because armies needed what they carried. The Red Ball Express operated for 83 days. In those days, it delivered victory.